In this video, we're going to look at the reflex arc. Reflexes are these rapid, involuntary, and predictable motor responses to a given stimulus. And we have two types of reflexes. We have inborn intrinsic and learned or acquired reflexes. These inborn or intrinsic reflexes are rapid, involuntary, predictable responses. But these are inborn or intrinsic, which means that we're effectively born with these. And so an example of this would be reflexes that help us maintain our body's posture and control visceral activities like blood pressure regulation. These can be modified by learning or even conscious effort, but that differs from the learned and acquired reflexes because these result from practice and repetition. So, for instance, driving skills are a learned and acquired reflex because this comes after practice and repetition of driving. And an example of this could be how you can use visual feedback to reflexively stay between the lines in traffic. That way you can stay in your lane and not drift into different lanes. So with reflexes, we actually have these 5 major components here. And pretty much all reflexes have these 5 components. So the first part of the reflex arc are receptors. We need a receptor to receive the stimulus, which is the packet of information. And then receptors can help transduce that into an action potential, whereby sensory neurons can transmit those nerve impulses back towards the central nervous system, either the brain and spinal cord. If those sensory neurons go back to the brain, we actually call that a cranial reflex. And if the sensory neurons go back to the spinal cord, that's part of a spinal reflex. And then once in the central nervous system, it's going to interact with integration centers, which can either be monosynaptic, which means you have one synapse between the sensory and motor neurons, or polysynaptic, where there's multiple synapses between the sensory and motor neurons. Now, ultimately, these are integration centers where processing of information occurs, but this occurs within the central nervous system. Now, the motor neurons are those which conduct efferent impulses back out to the peripheral effector, and this is going to go to the effector organ. The effector can be either muscle fibers or glands that respond to the efferent impulses by either contracting or secreting something. So we have 2 major types of reflexes, somatic and autonomic. Somatic reflexes involve skeletal muscle, and autonomic reflexes, which are visceral, include visceral effectors like smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or glands. So looking at the 5 essential components of a given reflex arc. The reason why it's called this is it kind of makes an arc here. Now, because this involves a spinal cord, this would be an example of a spinal reflex. And it also involves skeletal muscle, which means it's also a somatic reflex. Now, this example they're showing here is we have a receptor in our skin, and we would have a nociceptor. It's responding to a painful stimulus. This nociceptor would transduce pain information or stimulus into action potentials that travel back towards the spinal cord along the sensory neuron, whereby that sensory neuron then releases neurotransmitter onto the integrating interneuron here within the spinal cord. That interneuron then synapses or communicates with a motor neuron, which carries information out towards the peripheral effector. And in this case, it's going to be a skeletal muscle, which can help you withdraw from that painful stimulus. So you might step on a nail, and then your leg lifts up because the skeletal muscles contract and help you take weight off that painful stimulus. Now, in the future video, we'll talk about some of the specific types of reflexes our body utilizes for different types of stimuli.